Okay, our speaker today will be speaking about social psychology. This is a topic that I was talking to him before we talked here, that I took back in college. And it was one of the courses I thought for a year that I might major in psychology. And I took a social psychology class, and it just fascinated me. So hopefully his talk will do the same. So, I'm sure it will. What the heck? So, Dr. Caleb Reynolds, he is a visiting assistant professor here at Willamette, where he teaches moral psychology, social psychology, and intro psychology. He is a quantitative social psychologist, and he researches just about any human behavior that can be understood through data. His primary research interests are in moral traits, moral judgment, and decision making. And he talked to us last year, I don't know if it was spring or fall, but he talked to us last year on moral psychology, and it was a great talk for those of you who were around. Caleb received his BA in philosophy from Northwest Nazarene University, an MA in philosophy from Gonzaga, MS in psychology from Washington State, and his PhD in psychology from Florida State. He was also a postdoc at Wake Forest, where he worked on projects exploring honesty. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be back and talking with you. Okay, so my first thing I want to do is I want to congratulate all of you. You did something absolutely incredible when you came in here. I don't know if you noticed that you did it because it's commonplace for you. You do it all the time. It's old hat. You don't really think about it as you do it. But when you came in here, you were greeted with an absolute flood of information. You walked in here and your senses took in information about the shape of the room. They took in information about color, about shadows, about objects that you're familiar with, like chairs, objects that are more foreign, like this organ back here. This organ back here. You took in this absolute fire hose of information as you came into this room. Importantly, that included a fire hose of information about who was in the room. Dozens of people around here, some of whom you know well, some of whom you know less well, some who might be strangers to you, people who vary in every aspect that you can think of. You took in information on all those people like that, right? You may not have even noticed that you did it because this is so commonplace for you. You are so used to doing this. But this ability that you have to take in this fire hose of information from your environment is one of the things that amazes me most about humans. It's our ability to, at a glance, size up an entire huge social situation and know how to navigate it. It's this ability to cut through massive amounts of social information that I want to talk to you about today. And I want to talk to you about it from a framework that we call social cognition. So this is an approach to social psychology that thinks of social behavior in terms of the information processing that has to happen for us to interact with others in social settings. So this includes things like making sense of what we need to direct our attention to at a given moment, making evaluations of what is the case in our environment, remembering critical information and applying it in situations, and recognizing what different social opportunities mean for us in the situation we find ourselves in. So we have this incredible ability that I just gestured to cut through all of this information and know what to do in a complex social situation. And we do this automatically, right? This is not something that we have to carefully think about. We can cut through all that information very rapidly without conscious awareness of the fact that we're doing it. And that's a remarkable trait that humans have. However, those of you who, by a show of hands, who has heard the phrase something like, you can have it done fast or you can have it done right? Is this familiar? Same goes for cognition. Speed is not by itself accuracy. oftentimes that ability to rapidly process everything that's going on means that we're cutting corners. It comes with costs in terms of the accuracy of our social cognition. And that trade-off between the speed with which we can make sense of our social worlds and the accuracy costs that we have to incur to do so is what sets up what I titled in this talk sort of the beauty and the bias of social thought. That these two things come together and both make us capable of dealing with the massive amounts of social information in our world, but also make us susceptible to some ways of thinking that we wouldn't necessarily choose for ourselves. So turning first to how it is that we make sense of this. I want to go through some of the mental processes and tools that we use to make sense of our social world. So one of the first tools we can talk about is our ability to get a sense of what another person is like from a very small amount of interaction. I've been up here for, give or take, 10 minutes, and you already have impressions of what I'm like, what my personality traits are like, what I might be like in a conversation with you, and so on. We talk about this in social psychology as thin sliced judgments, evaluations of what a person is like based on a very limited bit of exposure. It's 10 minutes, not bad. Let's see what you can do in 10 seconds. So I've got a silent clip up here of a gentleman on the screen. Keep an eye on him for a few seconds and sort of see what you notice about him and what you kind of read based off of this very limited exposure. So all you got there was 10 seconds of silence, him gesticulating, interacting with someone else, and moving around. But you started to get a bit of feel for what he's like, right? You didn't hear him say a word. You didn't get any sort of in-depth information, but you were starting to have impressions about his age, about his gender, about his nationality, about sort of his personality and his charisma. You're getting these things from just a 10-second window. We call that a thin slice judgment. And one of the more impressive things about human social perception is that these thin slice judgments can be remarkably accurate. Remarkably for 10 seconds, that is. As those of you who've been married hopefully know, familiarity takes time, right? You don't get a full sense of what this gentleman is like or what I am like by 10 seconds or 10 minutes. But we can be surprisingly accurate in our social perceptions. That is, if we were to ask all of you to rate me on my personality traits, big 5 personality traits, let's say, how conscientious am I, how extroverted am I, etc. Research suggests you could do a pretty decent job at estimating what I'm like on these traits just based off of the few minutes that you've had with me. Hopefully not as well as, say, my wife, but much better than somebody who'd never met me, better than chance. This is one way that we can very quickly get a rough working sense of what other people are like, right, through thin slice judgments. But suppose that you don't have 10 seconds of watching this person. That is a lot of time investment, right? I don't have, let's say, if I'm looking out at you, the audience, I don't have 10 seconds per person to move from face to face and watch you and get this sort of sense. Okay, can I do anything with just a glance at you? As it turns out, yes. I can make, or I will make, inferences based off of just a mere exposure to your face. And I'll do so in relatively simplistic ways. Generally speaking, when we make first impressions based off of just at a glance look at what a person looks like, we're looking for sort of 2 central features that we talk about as core dimensions of person perception. And that is, we make a sort of snap, instant appraisal of how sort of trustworthy we think this person is and how socially dominant they are. These are the 2 things that we sort of immediately look for. And accurately or inaccurately, we can make that assessment in a split second. This is not going to be as accurate as that 10-second thin slice or actually getting to know a person, but this is information that we use to immediately cue ourselves to what to expect from other people. Moreover, at this same glance, we can more reliably recognize the emotions that people have. Does the face of this person suggest that I'm about to have some sort of a positive social interaction? Does it suggest that I'm under threat, etc.? Reread this in a snap. Again, just trying to cut through the litany of social information that's available at any given time. At a glance, I've got something to work off of. The next mechanism that we use to make sense of our social environments is what we call our theory of mind. So this is our ability to project and think about others having different viewpoints than us. Think about where another person sits and what beliefs they might have, what they might be reading into an interaction with us. And we care about that because it helps us predict what they're going to do. Theory of mind is a core psychological developmental milestone for children. This is something that we are watching for as kids develop to make sure that everything is going okay, that they're developing the capacity to project other minds. What you see up in the upper right is a representation of what we call the false belief task that we're looking for kids to develop somewhere in the age 3 to 5 range. What this task is you presented with a character on the left. Little Johnny comes in and puts a toy in the left cupboard there. He leaves the room and Susie comes in and moves it to the right cupboard. Johnny comes back in and you, with what I presume is your working theory of mind, will know that Johnny doesn't know that that toy is in the right cupboard. He will look for it in the left cupboard. A 2-year-old is not going to tell you that. A 2-year-old is going to falsely infer that Johnny has the knowledge that they have, and they're going to say, oh, Johnny's going to look in the right-hand cupboard for this toy. When kids can develop the ability to go, oh, he has a different belief about this. He has a belief that is now inaccurate. We treat that as a pretty major milestone in their ability to understand how others are interacting with their world. A major milestone in their development of theory of mind. The next way that we organize our social information is through the use of templates and expected patterns. So we talk about these in social psychology as schemas and scripts, where schemas are frameworks that we use to organize information, and scripts are expected patterns for how social situations will play out. So I might have a schema, let's say, for a student athlete in one of my classes. That is, I have a mental framework for the kinds of attributes that student athletes have, how they tend to act, what they tend to do, such that when I come to an interaction with a brand new face in my class, and they come up after the first day, and they tell me, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm a student athlete, I now know what is the next thing coming out of their mouth. They are going to talk to me about, I'm expecting to miss these days for my competitions. I've not met this person. I don't know what they actually are going to tell me, but I have a pretty good projection that I'm making based off of this schema, based off of this organizational framework for the attributes, the behaviors, the desires that somebody who meets this category is trying to accomplish in the world. Right? So I use these schemas to organize my expectations and organize information that comes in about individuals. And on the script front, that we use scripts as sort of set our expectations for what ought to happen when in social interactions. So you take the example of I'm going to a sit-down restaurant. We have a very predictable pattern for how things will tend to play out. I'm going to walk in, I'm going to get seated, I'm going to get handed a menu, I will order, they will bring it, I will eat it, I will pay, I will leave. We have a very regimented order of things that are going to happen in this social situation. And this gives us a predictability and an expectation that we can act on in these social situations. So these first several mechanisms have been all about pure efficiency. Just what are the ways that we go from more information to fewer things we have to do mentally. These next couple mechanisms are a little more motivational in terms of what it is that we're trying to do with our social interactions. So in social psychology, we often talk about social belongingness as a fundamental need or a fundamental motive. That is, it is something that is so core to what we are trying to do in the world that we treat it as the same level of drive as basic survival. Maybe this is us being a little too heavy on our own topic, but we don't think so. We think that humans are so wired for connection that they will go to extreme lengths to get that connection, to feel that social connection. And when humans don't get that connection, when that connection is frustrated, we see it connected to any number of dysfunctional behaviors, mental health issues, and so on. Moreover, we as humans use our social connections, use our social relationships as a starting point for our own identity. That is, who am I? Well, I'm defined in large part by who I connect to. I am, let's say, a father, a son, a sister. I am a member of this church. I'm a member of this community. I'm a member of this school or this workplace. These things, these connections that we have get baked into our very way that we see ourselves. They're not these isolated connections that exist outside of the me. Right? They are central to who that me is. In addition to sort of serving these fundamental motives, our social connections also give us information. They give us a sense of what is the case in the world, especially in situations where I don't have experience, cases where I don't know what is happening. We talk about this in social psych as shared realities. Our social connections that we have with others allow us to coordinate. They allow us to cooperate and do things that we are incapable of by ourselves. So if you've ever done a project with a group that you simply couldn't handle by yourself, this was a level of social coordination required for this, right? You had to engage in an amount of social interaction around what is the case in the world, like what are we working with information-wise, and what ought we be doing? What are the norms for what we are trying to accomplish together? You had to coordinate these things in order to effectively work in the world. The most powerful way that we engage in this sort of coordination, both of what is the case in the world and what we're trying to accomplish, is through language, right? We use words, we use symbols in order to communicate our mental states to others. There is a tiger outside. There is a thing we're going to go do over here. This language use that we have allows us to engage in this social coordination. And one more mechanism here that builds off of our capacity for shared reality is our use of emotions as our social signals. That is, we use emotions to rapidly cut through the situations we find ourselves in and signal things to our relationship partners. So this can be signaling I'm happy here, our relationship is good. I'm unhappy, we are at odds. This can be inviting people to do things in the sense of how I respond to you emotionally kind of gives you a limited range of options in terms of what's an appropriate response. If you walk up to me on the street and greet me, and I fix my brow, and I glare at you, and I maybe huff a little. The next step from you should not be trying to strike up a friendly conversation or banter. Right? Our emotions signal what the acceptable behaviors are from our social partners. And we're very good at reading that information from others. Sorry. Reading my notes here, not even showing you what I'm talking about. We also use emotions as cues about not just relationships, but about our environment more broadly. We talk about this as social referencing. If you've ever interacted with a child and tried to shape how they reacted to something, you've engaged in social referencing. There's the trick that they teach you as a parent to always respond not with panic when your kid falls down. Because if they fall, they're not sure what's going on, and they will look to you. And if your response is, they're going to react accordingly, right? They're going to break down. And they do this more than in just when I tumble. Little kids are forever looking to their parents for all these wildly bizarre, novel experiences they are having in the world. What is that? Who is this? Is this safe? Is this good? How do we feel about this? They're constantly looking to a parent for a cue about whether this is a positive thing in my environment or not. And the emotions that a parent shows towards the child in that setting or towards the thing that the child is trying to parse is a social reference for that child about this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. And kids cue off of that very strongly. You also cue off of this strongly. So this is not something that's restricted to little children. They use it powerfully, but even as adults, we cue off of the emotional reactions that others are having in a situation. If you walk into a room, say halfway through this talk, and people are happy, people are smiling, you have a different expectation of what's going on than if everyone is sullen or even angry looking. And they're like, what did he say to make the whole crowd angry? Right? You're cueing off of these emotional information that other people are giving you to very rapidly get a sense of the social situation. Right? This is social referencing. So I've whipped kind of quickly through these processes here, trying to get my note balance straight. But to put a summary on these processes that I've kind of like laundry listed here. These processes, these ways that human social minds work are fantastic for cutting through that fire hose of information. They are fantastic for making sense of a blooming, buzzing social world with so much information that we couldn't possibly handle if it all came in consciously. Incredible for that. But, as we mentioned before, you can do it fast or you can do it right. And oftentimes, the fact that we lean into these very fast ways of thinking for making sense of our social environment leaves us in a position where those same processes are very highly fallible. That is, they are very prone to systematic errors that we call biases that don't get us where we want to go in our social situations. That is, they are not accurate information for us. So the same things that make these processes useful also come with major downsides. I've kind of run myself here up against the first question section. So I don't know if you would like me to take questions now, do an early break. Beg pardon? Yes. Yeah, no.
It's up to you. You can do it now, or you can save it to the end, whichever you.
Yeah, why don't we? I'm happy to take questions now, on sort of this information processing as a whole.
Questions?
Thank you. Brad? Theory of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Just curious, two things. Is that what autism is about?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Is that kind of what autism is about?
Yeah. So the question,
and secondly,
sorry.
the child who at 2 will not recognize the information that the kid walking back into the room would not have. About what age do children develop that ability to see this occurred? The kid coming back in the room didn't see it, and so at what age do they develop an ability for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first off, is theory of mind connected to autism? Yes, very much yes. What you seemingly very accurately heard within there is that a lot of difficulties characteristic of the autism spectrum are difficulties in projecting sort of what other people are thinking, right? Theory of mind is thought of as one of the core deficits that underlie the symptoms we recognize as autism. That is, okay, if these all come from a couple core psychological sources, theory of mind deficits are one of those core sources. Consequently, various therapies that try to help manage symptoms associated with autism are often focused on training theory of mind, right? Explicitly teaching kids to recognize and infer emotions in a way that many kids do sort of more automatically, right? So a lot of treatments will try and target that as a point of intervention because this theory of mind is thought to be sort of core for that. And as far as false belief task, when do kids start to become able to do that? Most kids develop that ability sometime between 3 and 5 years. You don't usually see it before age 3. If you're not seeing it by 5, it's starting to be concerning. And it's not the only theory of mind task, but it's a very common one, and there are like task-specific ranges for when those capabilities come online. Does that make sense?
Hi, I'm Mark, and I'm curious if there are conditions or criteria that indicate how well people perform in that, like immediate instinctual response or assessment, a situational assessment like that. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is who was that guy? Did he think he was Tony Robbins? I mean, who is he, a hustler? That was
the fact that you did not recognize him makes me very happy. Do you know how few GIFs there are online of a speaker that my audience wouldn't recognize? It's like all of them, I'm like, oh, well, scroll, okay, presidents, okay, comedians, okay, actors. I recognize all of these people, so first impressions is not going to work, right? This is a Thai TV actor, I believe his name is pronounced Apo, on some form of a talk show. So that's who that gentleman was. Anybody familiar with Apo? Nailed it. So yeah, it was me trying to find the most obscure GIF I could so that I could actually do first impressions. And the first question was about sort of benchmarking for accuracy, right? How do we know when I say it's accurate? What is that compared to? Was that the question? So thin slice judgments are part of a broader project, if you will, within social and personality psychology, understanding accuracy of person perception, kind of regardless of whether that's 10 seconds, that's 10 years, or a lifetime. The sort of standards by which accuracy is determined varies from study to study, but the most common benchmark would be how that person describes themselves. So for instance, I could give everyone in this audience a short sheet here with a personality measure, have you fill it out for a target, say this person that you've been listening to, and then I could fill it out over here for me, and we could see who is close versus far from how I view myself. And we kind of give the person themselves privileged position in terms of what they are like, right? Under the general assumption that humans have sort of this privileged access to their inner life, so they are in a sense the best reporting source for what their personality is like, right? So usually the comparison would be to that person's self-reports on the same traits that you'd ask somebody to rate them on. Sometimes you compare them to, say, a knowledgeable informant, so somebody who knows the person well, like a good friend or a partner or family member, right? But usually it'd be comparison to what the person says themselves. Does that make sense?
Hi, I'm Bonnie. Oh, last question, I was just told. So you can see the evolutionary benefits of having these snap judgments, right, of threat and whatnot. But it seems like most people have some kind of pre-beliefs, stereotypes, something they've heard about what they're seeing. And how much does that override this more core snap judgment?
Can you clarify the question a bit? When you say some people have had something they've seen or heard.
Like propaganda, stereotypes, right? So I'm looking at somebody, but I actually have a lot of preconceived ideas that I'm wondering how much the real snap judgment, which seems very, animal kind of reaction.
I'm going to do something we've never done before because my question is almost identical to hers with one change. I believe that we each react to our situations through the filter of our own personal life experience. And each person in this room has a different filter because we've had different lives. For example, my wife and I are in Oregon for the first time for the first day, and a waitress says to us, "So, have you got anything good planned for today?" So I'm from the East Coast. Now, those of you who have grown up in Oregon know this is a pretty commonplace thing to say. My wife and I are reacting by saying, "We don't know this person. Why is she asking us such a personal question?"
Yeah, I think as you, intuited there, the answer to both of these is going to be very similar, which is when we're talking about sort of the snap judgments that we make, they are absolutely 100%. They are absolutely going to be loaded in part by my own experience, right? So the saying in social cognition that, oh, dang it, now it just went away. This isn't supposed to start yet. Here we go. Perception may not be reality, but perception is social reality. That is, I can only access the world as it comes to me through social cognition, as it comes to me through my mental processes of attention, interpretation, judgment, and memory. Therefore, anything that another person does that I have one of these snap evaluations of is going to be loaded by my own experiences, my own memories, my own knowledge, my own perceptual processes, including, for instance, theory of mind deficits or whatever things could color those mental processes, right? So the evolutionary point is accurate here in that this is adaptive in an evolutionary sense to have a way to quickly assess a situation. but that it is evolutionary does not mean that it's not also loaded by experience, right? We often talk about it as experience filling in a framework that evolution has given us. That is, if I didn't have any social experiences, I wouldn't have these snap judgments of personality in the same way that I do as a human who has had a lifetime of experience. Does that make sense? Does it get to your question, or did I answer something over here?
Well, I was just curious how much, because I'm surprised we're so accurate, given that everything is coming, from our own beliefs and stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like we would not be very accurate.
Yeah. So what accuracy we have there is based in part on the fact that as much as we respect humans as individuals, humans share a lot of traits in common. That is, extroverted people tend to act in certain extroverted ways. Conscientious people tend to act in consistently conscientious ways. And that, while having variation across people, there's also a core of commonality, right? If I get a group of conscientious people, highly conscientious people, they're going to have a lot of things in common, right? And so we pick up from our experience what those traits look like. And then when we apply them to a new person, right, it's going to be accurate to the extent that my perception of those traits maps onto reality. Does that make sense? I could take another question or take a break before that would be good.
You just had another module to go.
I do, yes. But it's like 2. I've got 2. I don't have 3, if that's what you're asking. Okay, perfect. No. More questions are great.
Hi, I'm Ken. I was wondering how you might equate this to creatures with smaller brains. For instance, a deer walks into a meadow, a whole fire hose of information comes in. Hey, there's something good to eat here. I don't see any predators. I don't see anything for them to hide. How might we process that differently than, say, that deer?
So you want me to solve Robert Nagel's "What is it like to be a deer?" right, on the fly? Okay. So that's a really tough one for me to answer without the benefit of self-report from the deer. But I would speculate that a lot of, especially the more basic evaluation of, is there a threat in my environment? Where are things spatially? I would imagine that a lot of the same mental things are going on for me that would go on for the deer there. Right? I don't know that I would expect that the deer is capable of perceiving that that actor is high on extroversion. But as far as the basic processes of visual perception, interpreting things in my environment, I would imagine that a lot of that is going to be parallel mechanisms to what's going on in humans. That said, I am neither a deer nor an animal cognition specialist.
So what's next? Should we take a break or?
Was there-
Oh, another question right there.
My name's David. And so you've walked into a room, you've made an assessment of the people that are in there. You walk up to somebody that you don't know, and you've made an assessment of them. And 10 seconds later, you realize you are absolutely wrong. What is the healthy way to recover from that? I'll leave it at that.
How badly have I offended them at this point?
Say it again.
I said, well, it depends. How badly have I offended them at this point? What's a healthy way to recover for that? As a general principle, we are not bound to our initial perceptions, thankfully. as a human who wants to exist in a world that isn't just reflexes and first impressions, we absolutely can override first impressions, initial judgments. Different sorts of information will carry different weight when we do update beliefs. So, for instance, strongly disconfirming beliefs or strongly disconfirming new information in assessing what a person is like will often strike me very heavily, draw my attention to that sort of discordance, and will get more weight than slightly disconfirming information, for instance. So we absolutely will overwrite those initial impressions. They just give us kind of a, if you will, like a working draft of what this person is like that we didn't have before any interaction. Does that make sense? But it's not the case that, oh, well, I'm going to stick with this for forever.
Hi, I'm Brenda. I'm just curious, so if you meet a psychopath or a serial killer, obviously they find these people who, probably any of us, couldn't make a judgment that they're dangerous. So is it something in their brain that they are so enhanced that we can't figure it out? Or is there something else going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one is that we are not perfect judges of character by any means. We're better than chance when we meet a person, but we're not, as good as if we got to know them better. So that's one aspect of it, is just there's inaccuracy there, and some people are better at sizing others up than are other people, as you've probably experienced. So there's sort of that perceiver side there. But as far as like the psychopath serial killer side, successful psychopaths or successful serial killers, psychopaths who don't end up in jail the first time, tend to be relatively intelligent individuals, tend to be relatively socially capable in the sense of they're aware of the social norms, they're aware of how people sort of expect to interact, and often will use that to their advantage in terms of sort of hiding their intentions. That is, you don't get to be a serial killer, definitionally having done this multiple times. You don't get to be that if you very clumsily sauntered through your first killing and leave this lion's pile of clues, right? So there's almost a selection there that for a person to be in the kind of category that you're thinking of, they have to be somewhat skillful, socially skillful. Does that make sense? And they often will do that by like masking behaviors or by consciously going through the behaviors that are expected. Cool. All right, that'll be a break then. Okay, so I left off saying that these exact same mechanisms that do so much work for us in terms of being able to effectively navigate a complex social world, these are the same mechanisms that can kind of betray us at times, mislead us if kind of left to run amok. If left to their own devices, it's these same cognitive processes that end up producing some of the social outcomes that we recognize that we don't want in our social interactions. So I'm going to kind of go parallel to the order that we went through with introducing these processes and introducing some of the outcomes that can come from them. So the first one, going back to those thin slice judgments, right? The same speed that makes them efficient to cut through and get a working model of what a person is like in just a few seconds also makes them prone to what we think of as stereotyping. Right? In social cognition, we frames stereotyping as the application of a group-based schema to an individual. That can get us to accurate information. So you think back to my schema for student athlete, right? My expectation of that first question they're going to ask me is about missing class for their games. Can get me to accurate information, but when we hold to those schemas too strongly, it ends up being what we more commonly talk about as stereotyping. That is, attributing group characteristics rather than individuating ones, ignoring individual information in favor of assigning attributes based on your group membership. And this doesn't even have to happen at sort of the level of conscious awareness, right? So when I form an expectation of a student judgment, this can be cognitively mediated. That is, this can be consciously handled. But in the case of stereotyping and implicit bias, this is often happening without us being aware of it. We just happen to come upon our perceptions of what these other people are like, and we may not always be aware of where that is coming from. Moving it to the more specific case of even that tiniest bit of information, right? We quickly slap labels on people based off of those immediate snap face perception judgments. But when we, again, put too much faith in that, those labels stick. That is, when we don't adequately update our beliefs about what an individual is like with that individuating information, this ends up looking like overgeneralization. That is, I give you a general description based off of that first pattern, and I assume that that is all I need to know. Right? Oversimplification is maybe another way to say that. And this can lead us to ascribe traits to people that may or may not even be there. Right? You look like this, you have this trait. It's very cognitively easy, but at a cost of accuracy. When we think about that theory of mind that makes us capable of predicting what people are like, this can lead us to a tendency to over-attribute what people are actually thinking. That is, we think we know what others are thinking, and we put that on them even if that isn't what's going on inside their head. We see this show up in a pattern that we call the fundamental attribution error in social psychology. It's a classic. This is the tendency that we as humans have to overemphasize the influence of person factors in producing behavior. Every behavior that we engage in is a function of both what we as a person bring to that situation as well as what the situation puts upon us. That's all well and good to say, but we as human perceivers with social minds tend to really lean into assuming that people's behaviors are caused by what that person is like. So when I run into a person who is glowering at everyone and is just in a generally foul mood, I'm immediately reaching for explanations about this guy's a jerk. Right? This guy has a really sullen disposition. I'm making attributions that are very much about what he is like as a person, and I'm focusing on that person factor, and because I'm generally unaware of, say, everything else that went wrong in his day when he got caught in a rainstorm, crashed his car, and spilled his smoothie all over himself just on his way to talk to me. Right? I don't have cognitive access to the situational factors that lead to his behaviors, the way that he's interacting with me. So I tend to overreach and ascribe those negative behaviors to him as a person. It's about him as a bad person. Conveniently, I don't do the same for me. We call this the actor-observer bias, that I am very happy to make person-level attributions for negative things that guy did, but when I do negative behaviors, when I am that irritated person, it's very clearly that I stubbed my toe on the way into the building and I have a lot on my mind, and this, that, or the other, right? It's all the situational factors in the world. Those are the reasons that I am just as much of a jerk as that guy, right? It's all situational. If they were good things that I did, though, that was me. That was person. Right, so we have this sort of asymmetries in how we attribute people's intentions and how we attribute where people's behaviors are coming from. This is coming from the same mechanisms of theory of mind that made us capable of predicting other people's actions in the first place. If you call back to those schemas, those scripts, those pieces of information that gave us a sense of how to navigate the world, right? What patterns am I going to see? What sequences are we going to go through in this social situation? What are the attributes of people like this or situations like this, right? Those mental mechanisms that give us some sort of a touch point to know what to expect. When we apply those too rigidly, they end up becoming confirmation bias. That is, I come to situations with these expectations of how the world is structured, right? This knowledge about these things are like this. These people do things like this. And I bring that schema to the world, and that's part of the lens through which I see the world. Going back to the point about perception is social reality, right? That's the lens through which I see the world, and I'm going to find ways to make the world fit into that. If I'm too tied to those beliefs, if I'm too unwilling to challenge my own beliefs on that, what ends up happening is that I start looking for the things that go along with that. This is a pattern that we talk about as confirmation bias, where there's three elements to it. There's selective exposure. I look for the information that fits into my worldview. I look for information, I reject information that is contradictory to it. I don't pay attention to that. Right, so I expose myself to the things consistent with my beliefs. When things get into my attention and into my consciousness, I tend to see them as consistent with my beliefs. So there's classic studies of confirmation bias where students who were on both sides of a political protest in terms of their attitudes, they watched the same clip and were asked, hey, which side is this protest, is this coverage in favor of? Lo and behold, it was their side. Same coverage, opposing views, it was seen as evidence in favor of their own side. Right? We talk about this as selective perception, that not just what gets into my consciousness, but how I interpret what gets in is colored by my own beliefs. And then finally, within confirmation bias, we have what's called selective retention. So not content to choose what gets into my consciousness, not content to interpret what gets into my consciousness, what sticks in my memory are the things that are consistent with my own beliefs. Information that is consistent with things I already believe, that gets committed to long-term memory better than things that are at odds with it. I'm very good at confirming what I believe, right? I have all these processes that make it where when I am too unwilling to challenge my existing schemas, I have all these mechanisms that will help me build up a mental world that is consistent with them. We call this confirmation bias. So I said before that this need to belong is a fundamental human need, right? I likened it to basic survival needs. It may be a deep human need, but that same need to bond to close others often helps me to push other people away. That is, if I'm using these motives to belong to this in-group, that often comes at the cost of defining an out-group, making a them in contrast to the us. This leads to any number of sort of in-group, out-group dynamics that you might be familiar with like excluding people who are not like me, showing favoritism to my in-group. And this is robust enough of a pattern that social psychologists can use it experimentally. Let me tell you what I mean. This is an approach that we call minimal group paradigm in social psychology, where I want to study group dynamics. Humans are so sensitive to us versus them, in versus out, groupishness, that I, as an experimenter, can make them into novel in-group, out-groups in a lab. Classic demonstrations of this, for instance, used two abstract artistic paintings, and said, tell me which one you prefer. I prefer this one, I prefer that one. All right, the researcher writes it down, goes to the next person. Researchers being researchers, they did not actually group them based off of their preferences. They randomly assigned them. They said, okay, you are in this group, you're in group A. You're in this group, you're in group B. Participants think that there's some meaningful connection now with these other people in their group. And that's enough for them to start showing in-group favoritism. That's enough for them to start showing out-group antipathy. Humans are wild. Replications of this used shoelace color as a minimal representation. A friend of mine studied this by assigning people to a personality color. You have the green personality people and the orange personality people, and boy, those orange personality people, we don't trust them. Humans will make in-group, out-group at the drop of a hat. It's built off this core motive to be connected, to be meaningfully connected to other people. So we use that to both make this sort of in-group, out-group dynamics, as well as it also produces undesirable effects just within our group. So one of the ways that we see this show up within groups is in what we talk about as groupthink. So this is historically in social psychology studied in the context of jury deliberations, where you've got a bunch of people who are in a sort of socially tenuous situation, right? We know each other somewhat, not great. And we're going to go and we're going to, as a joint group, we're going to make a very weighty decision. Has really big implications for somebody. What social psychologists were interested in was how much were potential jurors willing to sacrifice accuracy, getting to the correct judgment about the guilt or innocence of an accused party in favor of group cohesion in the discussion. And what they found were various mechanisms that would lead small groups in discussions like this into patterns that we now recognize as groupthink. That is the tendency to sort of suppress pushing back on the group, the tendency to go along a bit in order to preserve group harmony. Right? We talk about this as groupthink. Need not be constrained to juries. Any group where there's an important where there's a social element is open to the possibility that we prioritize that group harmony over accuracy or over the best decision that we can make. Similarly, this same sort of need to belong tends to motivate people to act as other people are acting. We call this conformity. Even in the absence of being told what to do, people will align themselves with the behaviors of those in their social group. The study of this in social psychology was greatly motivated by World War II and the Holocaust. How is it that everyday people can participate in great atrocity? This question sparked some of the biggest lines of social influence in social psychology research, including conformity. I don't have to be told what to do. I will go along for social reasons. We talked before about shared reality, right? That by having language to communicate with each other, we can get on the same page about what is the case in the world and what we're trying to do, what it is that we're trying to accomplish. This ability to have a shared reality through language, incredibly valuable for helping us to coordinate. There's a reason we are in a nice, air-conditioned-ish building that was built, I actually should have looked this up, many, many years ago, and that there are some 7 billion of us on this planet, right? It's our ability to coordinate that makes us capable of all of human society that we see, right? But that same ability, that same tendency to try and coordinate our beliefs, try and coordinate our shared reality, when it narrows too much, it ends up becoming a little bit echoey. It ends up becoming a place where reality starts to get a bit of a fuzzy term. So too much leaning into this sort of shared reality psychology ends up putting us at risk of sort of amplification of our most extreme beliefs. When we, for example, when we tend to, with a homogeneous in-group, talk through opinions that we have, those opinions tend to become more extreme, not more tempered. It's a general tendency in group discussions. Moreover, having sort of a shared reality that is isolated from sources of input makes us susceptible to misinformation by some of the same confirmation bias mechanisms that we saw before. We all want something to be true, and we've got this sort of echo chambery social environment that we have put ourselves into. It's an environment where truth is secondary to social cohesion. And then finally, turning back to the emotions that guide us socially. Right? We said that they give us information about what is the case in the world. We said that they give us information about how we ought to interact with the other who is emoting towards us. But in the same way that they can guide us socially, they can also distort our perceptions. My perception of other people is not just a function of their emotions, it's a function of my own. When I approach a social interaction with particularly emotions of fear, emotions of anger, that colors what I will see in that same interaction. It changes how I interpret an interaction that I would interpret differently outside of that emotional state. I fear you might worry for my marriage with some of the reference, with the repeated coming back to this, but when I say am in a bad mood and interacting with my partner, the same things that are appreciated under normal circumstances are now irritating. Right? Does this sound, the chuckles tell me this sounds familiar and I'm not alone. That makes me feel better. Right? How I come to the situation emotionally changes how the exact same situational factors are perceived. So our own emotions can that help us to know what to do can also send us down less than ideal paths in terms of our social interactions. And this is doubly so when it comes to misperceptions in emotion. So one of the realities of the modern world is that we interact with a far broader variety of people from far broader variety of cultural backgrounds than we would have 50 or 100 or 300 years ago. One of the things that comes with is cultural differences in how emotions are expressed. While there are similarities, there are strong similarities across cultures in how we express emotions, different cultures have different norms about when is appropriate, what are the appropriate ways to show an emotion, and to the extent that I expect a certain set of norms and someone is not acting in accordance with that, we get a distorted interaction. I don't read accurately what they want out of this situation. They don't read accurately what I want. We misread each other because of this sort of ships in the night expectations. So as we saw on each of those, these same processes that are helping us make sense of this torrent, this deluge of social information, they were so helpful for that. But they have these byproducts, right? They have these cognitive outcomes, they have these social outcomes that we didn't sign up for, right? We don't want many of these things as the outcomes of being able to handle our social situations. But this is kind of the place that we find ourselves, right? That we as humans are built to belong, but at the same time, not necessarily built for perfect accuracy. We're trying to get it close to right, don't always get it right. Isn't that fun? Aren't you happy you brought me here to tell you this? So, are we sunk? This is kind of the gist of how the first half of my social cognition chapter goes in the spring. I get through all this kind of stuff, and students are like, well, now what? What do you want me to do with this? What do you want me to do with all of that? No, I do not believe we are sunk just because of this. And at its root are some of the things that were gestured at in the first question and answer period. The reason we are not sunk is because efficient thinking isn't our only kind of thinking. That is, we can deliberately challenge the fast, quick, rule of thumb type thinking that characterizes much of these processes that I've laid out for you. When we as social psychologists think about trying to be efficient in our cognitive thinking, we often talk about efficiency as a motive that we are trying to fulfill. One of many social motives that we are trying to fulfill. Get any sort of sense of what's going on, right? Let's be efficient and quickly get any sort of sense. But it's not the only motive that we're trying to fulfill in our thinking. Oftentimes, we can have accuracy motives. That is, we want to know how things actually are, not just how they appear to us. We're leaning into this motive anytime that we meet someone new and we ask them a question about themselves, right? That we don't just go off that first impression, right? We're leaning into accuracy motives when we dig deeper into what a person is like or what is actually going on in the world, right? So when we have those accuracy motives, we tend to shift into much more careful, much more deliberative thinking, less of this sort of react to the world and more consciously evaluate what is going on. And that ability to switch between quickly parse all of this that's coming in to, okay, hang on. Let's get this right. Let's figure this out. That capability that we have is, I think, at the root of how we can deal with these negative byproducts of our social minds. So to try and be a little more concrete than just, you can do it, we're not sunk. Some ways that I think that we can, as people living in the world with these social minds, some ways I think that we can improve our chances of functioning better socially. Step one, understanding this stuff. Look at you go. Look, you are right here on the slide, right? You are here learning about this, understanding, trying to get a sense for how your social mind works and how it doesn't work. Shockingly, the person teaching social psychology, I'm a big proponent that learning about your own psychology can be very formative, that it can change how you view the world and change how you interact with the world. So understanding when your mind does and doesn't work well is sort of step one. Practical way that we can cut through a lot of the sort of stereotyping, implicit bias type stuff is moving beyond the application of schemas, moving beyond snap judgments, and seeking individuating information about other people. So the more information we have about a given person, the less that initial judgment gets weighted, right? So as I learn more and more about somebody, my first impression, Though it may last, it's going to get tempered, right? It's going to get absorbed into the updated information that I have. This has the extra side bonus that seeking individuating information like from the person themselves, so actually conversing with people, promotes social connection, right? So you're also hitting social motives in addition to accuracy motives to the extent that this is information that I'm actually seeking from you, the person I'm trying to perceive. The third recommendation that I think would help on this is this is not novel on my part by any means, but cultivating sort of a broad information diet. So because we live in a world where we have minds that are so good at picking out information and keeping information that's consistent with our beliefs, this whole confirmation bias mindset. We have minds that do this, and we have a world that is like tailor-made for that, right? We don't have the sort of common information sources that we had, 50, 70 years ago, where you had very limited ways to get information about the world, right? You had these papers here, you had these exact TV stations with the news that came on at the same time, and we all had the same information coming to us 70 years ago. We don't have that now. We have an utterly overwhelming amount of places to get information that is very much tailored to what we want it to be, right? You talk about partisan news coverage, you talk about algorithmic forces on social media, you talk about getting news by seeking it out. So like when I go searching for a news story, I'm actively engaging in seeking behavior here that can be colored by my own expectations and biases, right? So cultivating broader sources of input about what the world is like is, I think, a really valuable way that we can combat this. I'm happy to talk specifics on some of these, what I think that looks like during the Q&A. And then as a general principle, I'm a big fan of not trusting yourself. Not a fun way to go through life, but challenging yourself as frequently as you can on the beliefs that you're taking for granted. Whether it's beliefs about a specific person, beliefs about general beliefs about the world, beliefs about events, challenging yourself when you find yourself just assuming, right? When I haven't actually thought something through and I'm just receiving it as true, challenging myself on that. I often talk to my students about this in terms of intellectual humility, recognizing that I don't have perfect knowledge. I don't have a mind that is perfect at seeking out what is actually the case in the world. And so trying to challenge myself on that. But at root, I think that we got to remember that we have to appreciate our social mind for what it is. Our social mind is the product of 3 pounds of fat, protein, and water. You put some electricity in it, and you somehow get a coherent conscious experience out of that fire hose of information that you are running into every moment of your waking life. It boggles my mind when I think about it, that we are capable at all of conscious, coherent experience in a world as full of sensation as this is. It's one of the things that just leaves me gobsmacked about humans, and kind of gives me chills to think about. Right, that we are managing all of this with this kind of architecture. Maybe cut your mind a little slack, right? We're doing okay. We can do better, but this is our starting point, so we're doing pretty okay. That's what I have for you, and I'm happy to talk more.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I have a question with regard to cultivating broader sources of input. There's an organization called, God, I'm forgetting it. A group that gathers people of different political perspectives, and it's looking for common ground. And sometimes it's hard to get people from different groups to come together. What is keeping some people from coming and others from attending, and not trying to reach some greater common ground amongst us, wanting to stay separate?
Yeah. So what is basically why? So if we have structures for this, like why are people not taking advantage of it? Is kind of how I'm hearing it. You got to want to. It feels very good to be right about everything. I would know. It feels very good to be right about everything, right? It feels very good to feel like I and my in-group have a coherent, cohesive worldview that describes everything that's going on, and those people over there are misinformed at best, malicious at worst. That's a very easy place to be. I'm not challenged in that spot. I'm in the right. I know what is up and down. It's cognitively efficient, to put it simply, to be in that place. So the ease is one big issue there, right? You have to want to stretch yourself and be challenged in order to put yourself into those kind of situations, right? So there's that side of it. And then the other side is just there's a kind of a, if you will, kind of a purity mindset around political groups in particular right now, that you don't contaminate yourself, if you will, by these ideas over here. Now, this is not to say that most people hold these views, right? This is not even to say that a large proportion of people hold these views, but there are loud and amplified voices that object to any sort of cross-partisan productive conversation, right? And that I think can, one, tell people it's not okay to do this. Our group does not participate with those people. We don't negotiate with them in Congress. We don't engage with them socially, right? So it tells us we don't interact with those people. And why would they? They don't know what's going on, right? They're misinformed at best, malicious at worst. So I think those are the sort of two things I would point to, is the sort of purity mentality that is kind of crystallized around political divisions, as well as the cognitive efficiency side of it's very nice to have it all together and not be challenged. So I don't want to. Any other easy ones?
Hi, I'm Virginia. Your comments about the experimental testing for groupthink or judgment about other people reminded me of the brown eyes, blue eyes experiments that probably started a lot of this kind of thinking, which was, what, in the 1950s, perhaps?
So this is not ringing a bell for me. I'd be
the
curious.
little kids where the teacher said, today the blue-eyed people are going to get first in line, and they're going, second graders? Yep, okay. Kind of classic in psychology, which is kind of my background. But it very quickly became clear that the kids that were getting the good stuff were clearly breaking out of the social norms, and the brown-eyed kids that day were downers. They had a terrible day. And then the teacher the next day reversed it with the blue eyes being the less appropriate or less encouraged, favored groups. And then the same dynamic showed up very quickly with second graders. So that's one piece of the background. The other question that I have is in that short 10-second clip that you showed us, my reaction was, this is a con guy. Has anybody else had that reaction, or have you had that show up?
This is the first audience I've shown that to, so that would be a question for your peers. So to go to your, so I guess going in reverse order. So the con man thing, right? Color, it goes to, there's not a perception that comes out of this, right? There's going to be some commonality in how we interpret or how we perceive a person, but again, social perception is social reality. That is, you're only going through your own lens here, and that's going to color initial impressions as well. To the kids and the favoring status one, you explained the study, and I get the concept you're referring to. I'm forgetting what the stem of the question was at the beginning.
Is it the same kind of basis for separating out, or who is favored, who is not favored, in groups and out groups kind of thing?
Okay. Is the same kind of mechanism in play for in-group, out-group as for that sort of favored? Yeah. It's going to play into it. So that study sounds like it was more in line with sort of expectation studies. That is, how your teacher interacts with a kid will affect their engagement with the class, or affect how they will act in the classroom, right? Any number of studies have been done on this, right? You set the bar here for a kid, like you have no low expectations of them, and they'll rise to that, right? You expect nothing of me? Fine. Versus setting higher expectations and kids acting accordingly. It sounds like it's in that sort of a vein, but as far as taking this attribute and saying, okay, we're going to split the class on this, I would absolutely buy that those kids started to see each other in those sort of groupish terms. And that includes things like group esteem, right? So we know self-esteem, right? How good we feel about ourselves. But, when I'm part of a group and that group is the favored one, I'm going to feel better about myself as a member of this. I'm going to feel better about us versus I'm going to feel worse about us. That absolutely, I would absolutely buy that that's kind of also going on in that study. Does that make sense?
Hi, I'm Ava. Just wanted to say about the con man thing. I thought he looked like a really nice, kind, gentle person, so it's I'm probably the only one that thought that. But my question is, your steps for dealing with bias, they are kind of like speaking to the choir. For the people that are already open to doing those kind of things. Mm-hmm. Is there some kind of psychological method that you could use that are steps for people who are closed-minded to make them feel more comfortable opening themselves up?
So the thing that's coming most strongly to mind is less about me standing up, some academic, with his psychology degree at the liberal arts college in Oregon, standing up here and, saying things. What comes to mind is the reality that our social interactions are colored by who these people are. Our perceptions of others are affected not primarily by sort of cognitive, careful, cold evaluation, but by sort of feeling with another person, empathy as a connection. So in terms of how someone not sort of dispositionally open to these kinds of things, what kinds of things could make them willing to sort of start down that sort of a path. Anecdotally and based off of theory and moral psychology, we would say that personal experiences with close others on the other side of the political spectrum would be a very common mechanism by which people open up. So the loud example in my head is examples of people who are gay or lesbian being the first experience that their close family has had with that community, the first point of contact, right? It's different when it's my brother, my sister, my child, than it is, oh, those people over there, right? So what's coming to mind there, and that's not something that's like, oh, we'll set this up, right? Well, we'll just make this happen, right? But one of the more effective mechanisms I would suspect is kind of exposure to other ways of being and thinking from people that you are already tied and committed to, right? You can't just insert them into their life. There's got to be that sort of natural development of exposure from a person I have reason to care about. Does that make sense?
Hi, I'm John. So you did not mention anything about obedience or authority. It seems to me, in terms of efficiency, that's one way people are efficient, is they just defer to authority. And the other is, I'm thinking of a couple of old experiments. I think it was Milgram, Stanley Milgram, the shock treatments, where somebody told the student to administer electric shock treatments to somebody else, and kept ramping it up and ramping it up. And the other was the prison experiment that we talked a little bit about before, where the lesson seemed to be that people will often defer, they will be obedient to authority figures. So I don't know what the precise question is, but it is like, how does that play into the belonging and the efficiency that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I absolutely could have included, obedience to authority on that same slide where we had conformity. So we often talk about, in social psychology, we often talk about like standard or classic conformity studies at the same time as talking about classic obedience studies like Milgram's, where the distinction we make is, okay, conformity, you don't have to actually be asked to do anything. Right, you're going along, you're seeing the behaviors that in-group is doing, and you're aligning yourself accordingly. You're not being explicitly asked. Whereas obedience is, there is some authority figure that is directing a behavior, right? And you respond as that authority figure is directing, right? As far as where that fits into sort of motivations to belong, higher motivation to belong is, perhaps unsurprisingly, going to promote willingness to go along with that authority figure. It's going to promote both willingness to conform as well as to obey an authority figure. And it sounded in your question like you were reading that both as like that social motive as well as like the informational motive. And I don't know specifically research looking at informational motives on it, but I would absolutely buy that we can use obedience in a situation where we don't know what to do, right? If you think about parents and kids, oftentimes parents know things about the situation that the kid doesn't know, right? And the parent gives a direct command, hey, we don't go over there because you're gonna fall down into the creek bed, right? Obedience there is information tracking in the sense that, oh, this is what I ought to do in this environment. I would imagine the same dynamic occurs socially among adults, right? That absent some information about what us ought to be doing, a command from an authority figure, hey, that's a pretty good cue of what we ought to be doing. So I would absolutely buy that people use it informationally, but I'm not specifically aware of research on that point. Does that track?
Hi, my name is Anne, and my question is about moral harm or moral hazard. We've been talking about different groups that are in conflict with each other, and frequently the differences are value systems. You said from benign to malicious and things like that. A lot of the things we're attributing to others is based on our value systems. My question is, when you've got a lot of groups that are subjected to moral injury or moral harm, how do those groups get better, heal themselves?
That's a great question. So some of it is going to depend on the type of moral injury, type of moral harm that is occurring. So to the extent that the groups themselves sort of remain intact and can interact with the groups that have done the harm, that is how I'm thinking of, say, rather than generational offsetting. So for you can contrast, say, conversations about reparations for slavery, right? You've got groups generations removed from the initial harmful acts, right? And it's kind of odd to some people in the conversation of, okay, how do we reconcile about this when we're not the ones who are involved, right? That's different than when the groups are still when the groups still exist as groups and can interact. Reconciliation activities can, as far as making up for some of the harm and damage, as far as actively trying to rebuild social connections, that can be useful. It doesn't take away the harm, obviously, but as a way to move forward. So I'm thinking in particular of interventions that they tried to do, or community rebuilding that they tried to do in apartheid South Africa, right? People who had gone through this process with their neighbors and now trying to, rebuild their communities. Or I'm thinking of Sri Lankan civil war, right? You had neighbors who now are, after the conflict, are trying to rebuild their communities together, right? So in those sorts of settings, I think that there's more obvious possibility for path forward because you can lean on the sort of psychology of how do we heal from individual harms, right? So when I do harm to another, there are certain things that have to happen for us to reconcile, as far as like me acknowledging my wrongness in this, me acknowledging the harm that I did, me trying to, as much as possible, make up for the damage or fix the damage that I did, right? There's certain things that have to happen when I reconcile with someone that I've wronged that transfer to group settings when those groups are sort of coexisting in time. It's less clear to me how that translates when we've got generational separation. I'm not sure psychologically how that works. Does that get anywhere helpful?
Hi, I'm Dean. I'm just curious about when you get a degree in this field, how does it change you? I mean, is that too broad a question?
Yeah.
Because it just seems like you get the answers to a lot of the keys of a society, even though it's not absolute, but it seems like it would have a...
I wouldn't go so far as answers, but you have better questions. Speaking personally, which is all I feel qualified to on this front, for me, there was a strong intellectual humility around social issues that was absolutely not the case for younger Caleb. I told you, I had it all right. Had all the right answers. So for me, there's a strong humility around recognizing that I have this opinion, but that is in part a function of the experiences that I've had and these things that I know. I still believe my beliefs, but I am not so, I would say I'm not so firmly fixed in them as I was prior to this kind of development. And I feel like on my good days, I'm more open and compassionate to those who believe differently than me. That I'm more amenable to the possibility that someone else's deeply held beliefs can be truly that. They are not like that because they are evil. They genuinely act out of what feels moral to them, what feels good as far as like this is right, you know. And that's something I try to instill when I teach moral psychology in particular, is trying to do that perspective taking. How much I do that successfully? It's difficult. It's difficult to be willing to put yourself in another person's shoes like that. But for me, that's been kind of how this has changed me personally.
Hi, my name's Rudy. You made a point, and I'm at that point where I grew up, and up until, I don't know, digital age, I learned to trust information, new information. And I ran into a book today that I really find fascinating. It's not fiction. And my first thought is this his opinion or is it factual information? And how does that affect us right now? How does that affect us right now?
The distinction between fact and opinion, or?
Yeah, that the information we're getting. I read an article a couple of years ago, and the best newscasters were just barely over 50% accurate.
That's what you want to hear.
So, you know, I gave up on all media information. So
how do we deal with what seems to be extremely variable quality in the information that people try to convey to us? How does that hit us in this environment? It's a problem, obviously. Not gonna sugarcoat that one. As far as how we respond to it, in terms of just descriptively, I feel like my students who are coming into college now, they're 20 years younger than me, which hurts to say. I've not come to terms. They're 20 years younger than me. They're closer to me in age than I am to some of you in age. Not pointing at anyone. But I feel like they are further from my approach to information in the world than I am from my seniors' approach. That even in the time that I have been an adult, the information ecosystem has changed so dramatically that I feel like students come with so much more skepticism than I did when I came to college. I'm not comfortable to say that they come quite with nihilism about it, but the word comes to my mind occasionally. When they've grown up in this environment that is so pervasively filled with partisan media and with misinformation and with all of the sorts of social ills that we see that you're thinking of, it seems from this one professor's perspective to have affected how they view the capacity for truth and reality. That said, they still they feel like they're of two minds about it. They feel like they, on the one hand, know and have really internalized, I don't trust this. I don't trust any of this. But at the same time, they seem to operate with what seems to be a very basic human assumption of that we can have accurate information, that we can accurately know things, that there are true things in the world. Sort of a naive realism about knowledge, coupled with sort of learned realization that this ecosystem ain't it. It's an odd tension in today's students that I don't feel like was as pervasive when I was growing up. I don't know if that's the direction you were asking about, but that's what comes to mind with where you're going.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Riddle.
Thank you all.